Well, you two look like you had some fun.
Someone had some fun,
Rangobart said as he loaded another bag into the carriage.
I got your lunch, Prez.
Dimia rummaged through her spoils for a minute before locating a basket covered in red checkered cloth. The food vendor made a big deal out of preparing the meal for the noble young couple which, of course, came with the requisite price.
Rangobart, can you set up the table?
Just a moment. Rangobart pulled his head out from the luggage compartment and circled around to the open carriage door. It took a moment for him to figure out the contraption that lowered the table from the ceiling. Even carriages built in Warden's Vale have all sorts of strange features. While they weren't as advanced as House Wagner's vehicles or as ornate as a high-class carriage in the Empire, Lady Zaradnik was far too modest about the thing. To that point, everything her territory produced was presented in the same manner.
Is there anything you want from the back before I close things up?
Rangobart asked.
Eh? The seat doesn't open up to the back?
It didn't, and he ended up moving half of what he put in back out. The sun was directly above by the time they finally made their way out of Croston. When they got onto the highway and their ride turned perfectly smooth, Dimir started serving lunch.
So, Lady Waldenstein said,
what did you find out? There isn't anything special about the town itself, Dimir said.
The people are really different from the ones in Corlin Harbour and Warden's Vale, though. It's almost like they're all pretending that they're still a part of Riastais.
I don't think there's anything overly strange about it, Rangobart said. Culture doesn't change so quickly.
We were just exposed to the places on a theocracy border first.
Do you think Zaradnik was right about what she said?
About how the Empire will follow a similar path to them?
I can see why she would say that. But it won't, Frian prompted.
Dimir stuck a slice of sandwich on his plate.
Rangobart absently picked it up as he considered his reply. The influence of the temples is subdued here, he said. Ours will put up much more of a fight. Swaying the minds of millions of people will be much harder than a few 100,000.
The Sorcerer's Kingdom is pretty light on them,
Dimir said. I don't think we saw a single death knight. Some of the men I spoke to claim that they're bad for business, Rangobart said.
They are trying to attract merchants from Riastais and don't want to scare away what few they have coming from there.
That's something the Empire will have to consider when it comes to Carnassus. It's probably why they started integrating the undead security out of the way of the central trade artery, Frian said.
Merchant traffic from Carnassus has dropped by half since last summer even though we don't have a single visible death knight in our winter. Having undead posted everywhere would scare away pretty much everyone.
He supposed it was all part of the same overarching strategy.
The world seemingly split itself into two sides since the appearance of the Sorcerer's Kingdom.
Without their suzerain lifting a finger, the Empire was pressured into shifting its political and economic stance to favor the few relationships still open to them. It was likely the driving cause behind the Empire's new expansionary policies. What they could no longer gain by trade, they would seize through conquest. I wonder if it's worth the trouble, Rangobart murmured.
What is?
Dimir asked. The Empire still conducts itself as it has in the past, he answered.
Foreign affairs, especially.
We're fighting an uphill battle trying to maintain diplomatic and economic ties with the city-state alliance. Why not fully invest in our status as a member of the Sorcerer's Kingdom's new hegemony? This parallel effort we're making seems wasteful at best.
Is this from General Ray?
Lady Waldenstein asked.
No, we've never spoken about this.
He made the same case to the court council when he assumed command of the 6th Army Group a few months ago and requested a bigger budget.
And?
Rangobart leaned forward curiously. How did the court council react? That sort of change isn't easy to accomplish, the head court mage said. 3/4 of the Empire's trade goes east these days. The entire country will suffer if we pivot to a more exclusive foreign policy. The Sorcerer's Kingdom isn't a very large market.
Did he get his budget increase, at least?
Lady Waldenstein shot him a reproachful look.
No.
The resources went to the fleet.
The fleet?
Rangobart furrowed his brow in confusion. That's probably the last place I expected any money to go.
We were surprised,
as well, Lady Waldenstein admitted. There's been a steady rise in piracy on the northern sea lanes since winter. The Navy is outmatched and they're considering co-opting the Imperial Air Service for anti-piracy operations. Has anyone figured out why this is happening? We've yet to receive any relevant information from our intelligence network in Carnassus. It's utterly strange considering that Veneria has had a spotless record against piracy for over a century. Something catastrophic must have happened to them if pirate fleets are making it to our waters. That wasn't good. The development of the blister was closely tied to trade on the Golden Strand. Logistical costs would increase dramatically if trade shifted to the inland route through our winter, making their exports less attractive, if affordable at all, to foreign markets.
I think this is all the more reason to shift our focus, Rangobard said. The sooner the Empire adopts undead logistics and lays down the infrastructure to support high-speed transport, the less of a problem these foreign events will be to us. Trying to maintain two incompatible standards is costing us dearly.
You are right, Lady Waldenstein said.
But I'm not the one you need to convince.
Never mind convincing,
these things simply take time.
Time and leeway.
Rangobard sucked in his lips, recalling Countess Corlin's opening statement to his father's delegation. Had she somehow considered the Empire's situation in its entirety in her calculations? If so, she possessed intellect and beauty in equal measure.
To top it off, she didn't tell a single lie.
She understood the trap that the Empire had found itself in and how it could get itself out. The Imperial administration was so driven toward efficiency that even the substantial leeway created by the reorganization of the Imperial Army had already been reallocated.
Furthermore,
it couldn't issue further reforms without angering the temples, hurting themselves economically, and driving resentment against Imperial rule through the roof. Ironically, it was a situation created by the Empire's iron grip on itself. One of the only ways to pry its metaphorical fingers loose was to have elements of the aristocratic establishment act independently, which was something that the imperial administration would normally never allow and certainly wouldn't ask out of an unwillingness to unravel the precedents it had worked for generations to establish.
Of course,
the Sorceress Kingdom could just tell them to make the required changes and the Empire would have no choice but to obey. That, however, seemed to be contrary to their apparent desire to have the Empire run itself, and no one in the Empire wanted outsiders telling them what to do anyway.
The nobility is going to gain a lot of power in the near future, Rangobard said. Both the civilian and martial establishments.
How do you think the Imperial administration will react?
If you're referring to Corlin's proposals, Lady Waldenstein said, your guess is as good as mine. It has been 2 generations since any noble house has made such strong, independent moves in the Empire. Since the Sorceress Kingdom is involved, the Imperial administration will probably content itself with collecting the improved tax revenues until they get a better idea of what's going on.
And when they believe they have enough information?
I can't imagine that they'll let the nobility run around with more power than they already have. Any hope for violent resistance to imperial rule may be quashed, but there are other ways to maneuver.
It's all relative, don't you think? The economic and political side of things has always been less tangible, but it has always been a balance between the imperial dynasty and the aristocratic establishment. So long as that balance is maintained, the empire as a whole only gains in power. He wasn't sure that things would work out so smoothly. Generations of vicious competition created a highly competent body of nobles, and the more capable one was, the more willing they were to test their boundaries to pursue any opportunities they identified. The establishment might not try anything inside the empire, Dimir said, but that won't stop them from trying something outside of it. Most of our factions already have some ties in Carnassus, and all of that new wealth coming their way can be used to influence the politics of the city-state alliance.
That's something for foreign affairs to digest, Lady Waldenstein said. What do you think they would do?
I think they'd allow it, Dimir immediately replied. It's just another way for the Empire to expand its influence. If something bad happens, we can use it to justify demands or even go to war to protect imperial interests. With the Sorceress Kingdom protecting the Empire, it's a gamble we can make with impunity.
Rangobard nodded in agreement.
Even if the nobles would gain more power by adapting the Sorceress Kingdom's logistics and industrial advances, a faction still wouldn't be able to challenge the city-state alliance. If they wanted the Empire to intervene on their behalf, they would need to stay in the Emperor's good graces, and the Emperor would be more than happy about having a new way to control the Empire's aristocratic establishment.
It was about as close to a mutualistic relationship that the current empire could attain between the crown and its nobles, focusing the ambition of its factions, the foundation of a new imperial mandate that could have the Baharuth Empire devour the city-state alliance within a generation or two. Maybe that was part of the plan all along. He wouldn't be surprised if it was. The machinations of the Sorceress Kingdom tended to be unfathomable in their scope. Whenever he thought he had figured out why they did anything, he would be made aware of yet another layer to their schemes. The scenery outside his window transitioned from rolling pastoral fields to the familiar parkland of a forestry-focused fief. They occasionally passed wagons loaded with cords of firewood and great lengths of timber. "This must be Jesn County," Lady Waldenstein said. "Jesn?" Rangobot slowly repeated the name. "It sounds like it's from an older dialect. Of the Oak Grove, or something like that?" Dimir offered. "I think so," Rangobot said. "The name matches the local industry. What's the presiding lord like?" "She's an impressive woman," Lady Waldenstein said. "I can't say the same for her heir apparent, though. Gah, just thinking about that guy makes me want to punch him in the face," Dimir said. Rangobot gave Dimir a questioning look. She was always energetic, but that energy was rarely spent on expressions of personal violence. She was, until recently, the old countess, Lady Waldenstein told him. The Battle of Katza Plains took her son and her son's only child, so she ended up becoming the countess again. House Jesn is a cadet branch of House Bloomrush, so she went and found a new heir from Riastais. "What house is he from?" "None. He's just the closest identifiable candidate. His family worked at a town workshop." "He's insufferable," Dimir said. "Like a spoiled scion straight from a bard's tale." "To be fair," Lady Waldenstein said, "they only just recently took him in. He has to catch up with years of education." "How old is he?" Rangobot asked. 12 or 13? Dimir answered sourly. "If you ask me, they should just have him produce a kid and then kill him off. Even the taste of imagined power reveals him for what he is. It's better not to waste any time on this guy and start fresh." "Could we not so casually talk about killing the Sorceress Kingdom's nobles?" Lady Waldenstein said. "It's not as if we're killing them," Dimir replied. "I bet the Sorceress Kingdom wouldn't mind, either. Getting stuck with a crappy count for a generation or two probably isn't something that they'd tolerate." Rangobot had no idea what the Sorceress Kingdom would do to a crappy count, but he couldn't refute what Dimir was saying. It would be in the best interests of the young lord if he showed substantial improvement soon. Traditions of inheritance likely meant nothing to their undead sovereign in the face of highly problematic performance. "Are we stopping in the town up ahead?" Rangobot asked. "We left Croston less than an hour ago," Lady Waldenstein said. "Let's just head straight to E-Rantel." He issued instructions to the Solita, then frowned out of his window as the carriage took an unexpected turn. "They built a way around the town?" "It looked like it," Dimir said. The weathered stone walls of the town went by, but the carriage didn't return to the highway. Instead, it sped northeast through a patchwork of farmland and forest. To their north, the looming peaks of the Azalizia Mountains steadily drew closer. "I think I see it," Dimir pointed at something in her window. "I guess we're entering through a different gate." She turned out to be correct. A few minutes later, the road joined with another that led straight to the city's northern gate. "The architecture of the city seems in line with those towns in the west," Rangobot said. "I wonder if anything has changed since it was annexed." Wagner mentioned the slums being repurposed to a demi-human quarter, Lady Waldenstein said. "For the most part, however, it sounded like she was trying to dissuade us from visiting the city. And now we're visiting it." "It couldn't be that bad," Lady Waldenstein said. "We all know that it was built by Riastais, so it isn't as if we'll expect it to be the same as Corlin Harbor. Didn't you say you wanted to see how the people were faring under the Sorcerer King's rule?" Dimir could use the chance to scout out the city for foreign affairs, as well. There wasn't any traffic at the northern gate, and a quick round of questions from the customs officer, it wasn't an elder lich this time, saw them into the city with no issues. They were immediately greeted by the sight of a huge graveyard on their right and rows of demolished buildings on their left. Rangobot stopped the carriage to get out and look around. "Have you been here before?" Dimir fell into step beside him. "Once," he replied. "We stopped here for a night on a trip to the Theocracy when I was 9. I believe the outer ring of E-Rantel used to function as a barracks for Riastis' royal army. Due to its nature as a fortress city, E-Rantel looked quite impressive to his younger self. Now, it looked much smaller, especially since he had moved to Winter to attend the Imperial Magic Academy. With age and experience, he also noticed a number of flaws with the city's design. Foremost amongst them was the fact that it tried to be a fortress city and trade city at the same time. As a result, it served neither of those roles well. The area being demolished was cordoned off. Rangobart came as close to one of the work sites before calling out to a dwarf directing a team of ogres transporting debris. "Excuse me." Several of the ogres looked at him. The dwarf didn't. "Excuse me, good dwarf." The dwarf looked up from his paperwork and cast a glance over his shoulder. He bid the ogres to get back to work before turning to shuffle over. "Yeah? What do you want?" "Apologies for interrupting your work," Rangobart said, "but could you explain what's happening to the old military district?" "It's being torn down," the dwarf replied. "All of it. Sorcerer's Kingdom's got no use for this military district. This section here's going to be another expansion of the demi-human quarter." He scanned the demolition site behind the dwarf. The demi-human quarter was probably just over the city's second wall. "Is the wall coming down too?" "No, we've got races that could use the thing." "I see. I also noticed that you aren't employing undead labor." "Why is that?" "Skeletons can't sort materials out on their own," the dwarf replied. "Ogres aren't very bright, but they can at least do that." He made a mental note about the limits of skeletal labor. They were advertised as ideal for menial tasks, but it seemed that some menial tasks were too complex for them. "Will you be magically repurposing the material?" "Huh? What are you talking about?" "Never mind. We should let you get back to your work. Thank you for your time." Rangobart and Dimir returned to the carriage. Lady Waldenstein's gaze went back and forth between them, hands folded comfortably over her swollen belly. "What did you find out?" she asked. "The entire military district is being repurposed for civilian use," Rangobart answered. "This part we're passing will be an expansion of the demi-human quarter." "How large is the demi-human population here?" "That, I didn't ask. Shall I instruct the Soul Eater to take us there for a look?" Lady Waldenstein shook her head. Even after her time in Warden's Vale, she was clearly still uncomfortable around demi-humans. Without any particular destination in mind, Rangobart asked their Soul Eater to take them to a place where they could be oriented with the city's layout. It took them straight to the city's central district, where it rounded a palatial villa before stopping halfway down a wide boulevard lined with fruiting trees. "Would you like to come down this time, Lady Waldenstein?" Rangobart asked. The Countess looked up and down the paved lanes before nodding. Rangobart went around to open her door and help her out of the carriage. "This central district seems normal enough," Rangobart said. "Government offices, accommodations for the well-to-do, household staff going about their business." "What's that?" Dimir pointed to the opposite side of the boulevard. There, a small crowd was gathered, wrapping around the street corner. An occasional cheer rose from the group. "Some sort of theater, perhaps?" Lady Waldenstein offered. The audience was a good mix of people from different vocations. There were even some household staff from several different manors present. The Death Knight sentry nearby made no move to intervene in whatever was going on, so it seemed to at least be a regular occurrence in the city. As they made their way across the street to the crowd, a familiar, rhythmic sound caught his attention. "I think they're spectating a fight," he said. "You mean it's a fighting pit?" Lady Waldenstein's wariness visibly melted away. "It sounds like an exchange of blades, at least," Rangobart said. They went to occupy a gap in the crowd, finding what indeed looked like a fighting pit occupying the ground floor of the building. It even had 3 rows of seating which were filled with human and demi-human spectators alike. In the arena itself was a lithe young woman wielding a rapier and dirk squaring off against a tall man with a longsword. "Oh, she's super aggressive," Dimir said. Indeed, the woman seemed to be suppressing the longswordsman through sheer ferocity alone. The point of her blade kept coming, and what Rangobart at first thought was a fast-paced exchange was in reality a one-sided flurry of attacks. "Yep, that's our Alice," the man beside him said. "I swear she gets more feisty every day." "Is she a crowd favorite?" Dimir asked. Among us humans, yeah. The goblins, too. The bigger demis favor the adventurer guild's hard hitters. More relatable, maybe. These are adventurers dueling? Yeah, this is their training hall, the man gave their group a once-over. You folks look like you're from the Empire. Yes, we're here on business, Rangobard nodded. It's our first time to E-Rantel under the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Well, in that case, welcome back. We've lost out on a lot of trade with Riestais and the Theocracy since then, but things are much improved locally. It looked like they were turning the city upside down when we came in. You mean the military district? About damn time, I say. Riestais left the place empty most of the time. Us people who actually live here will put it to better use. I don't doubt it, Rangobard said. What do they plan on using it for? Well, they're adding that one extension to the demi-human district, but the rest is being added to the common areas of the city. I hear they're planning to redo the whole city with all the new space. Is there any way we can orient ourselves to all of the changes? Sure is. The administrative office right next to the Adventurer Guild. They hand out maps for newcomers. They stayed for 3 more bats before Angobart had to almost drag Lady Waldenstein and Dimir away. The aforementioned maps were available to anyone who wanted them at a display just inside the front door. He held it open between his 2 traveling companions as they pored over the details on the sidewalk outside. It looks like the main plaza is a 5-minute walk from here, Rangobart said. Should we head over by foot? That's probably a good idea, Lady Waldenstein said. It may be too crowded there to bring a carriage. There's the Dragon Aviary, Dimir pointed at a portion of the central wall north of them. It looks like all of the magical shops are in the western quarter, Lady Waldenstein murmured. As they continued to identify points of interest, the other people on the street started to rush around them. Rangobart scanned the promenade, but he didn't notice anything amiss. A moment later, a pair of maids stopped next to him, lowering their heads toward the road. Excuse me, miss, he asked in a low voice. What's going on? His Majesty is returning from his walk around the city, one of the maids replied. On the other side for him, Lady Waldenstein and Dimir were similarly frozen. They couldn't exactly run away, so they imitated the 2 maids. What seemed like an eternity bowing over the sun-beaten pavement passed before a shadow fell over them. If I'm not mistaken, Countess Waldenstein? They looked up at the familiar voice of Moman the Black. Behind him was a skeletal being adorned in incalculably precious robes. Beside the skeletal being was a world-class beauty in a diaphanous white dress. She might have been mistaken for a human but for her black wings and the horns gently curving around the sides of her head. Standing on the opposite side of her was another peerless beauty with dark hair and a sharp look. Going by the adamantite tag hanging from her neck, she was beautiful Princess Nobby, Moman's partner. That's strange, I don't feel anything from most of them. Extremely powerful individuals exuded an aura of strength that even everyday civilians could discern. The undead being standing between the 2 gorgeous women should have been Ainzul Gaun, the Sorcerer King, but Rangobart felt nothing out of him. Nobbe and Moman were similarly absent of any sensation that they should have had. The only one who felt unfathomably powerful was the winged woman, who smiled serenely beside the Sorcerer King. Was it the effect of some protective item? The Sorcerer King had so many obviously magical items on his person that there was no telling how many enchantments he possessed. Acquaintances of yours, Moman? The Sorcerer King asked. Indeed, Your Majesty, Moman answered. I met them in Baroness Saradnik's territory while they were observing the Adventurer Guild's activities. This is Frianne von Gushmund, Countess of Waldenstein and the new Imperial Head Court Mage. Beside her is Dimir Eriks, an officer in the Imperial Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Last, but not least, is Rangobart Burbad, Viscount of Brennenthal and Mage Captain in the Imperial Army. They're all attendees of the trade fair being hosted in Corlin Harbour, Frianne von Gushmund. The Sorcerer King seemed to ponder the name. Where have I heard that name before? Frianne von Gushmund is the Academy graduate who produced the treatise on magocratic governance, Your Majesty, the winged woman said. Ah, of course. The Sorcerer King's skull bobbed in recognition. How could I forget? A very interesting read, that. It seems you have a bright future ahead of you, Lady Waldenstein. I am flattered to know that you've read my work, Your Majesty. Lady Waldenstein lowered her head. And you, the Sorcerer King turned his attention to Rangobard. Your name also seems familiar. Have we perhaps met somewhere before? Had they? Rangobard was certain that they hadn't. He would have never forgotten something so important, but when an individual of such power suggested it was so, it naturally led to self-doubt. Lord Brennanthal commissioned the Adventurer Guild to survey his new titles. Your Majesty, Moman said. I believe you made him a special offer. Yes, I remember now. I am pleased that you have decided to employ our Adventurer Guild, Lord Reburbad. If you need any more coupons, please let us know. I can get more? Rangobard lowered his head in gratitude, his mind spinning as he recalculated everything he had planned out thus far. Coupons were terrifying things. So was the Sorcerer King. There was no way someone like him could have forgotten something that had just happened mere days ago, yet he was confident enough to transform it into a device to facilitate an active conversation with his subordinates. Since I know of these two, the Sorcerer King leaned forward to regard Dimmer. Does that also mean you are an individual of some renown? That's. Dimmer's eyes turned down to the cobblestones, then came back up again. Dimmer is working hard to join the Baharuth Empire's diplomatic mission to the Sorcerer's Kingdom. Seriously? Are you crazy, Dimmer? Oh, is that so? Your Majesty, the Winged Woman said, we are not aware of any such mission. Foreign Affairs is sitting on it. Dimmer put on a glum look. No one else wants to join and they think I'm too young to be an ambassador. The Sorcerer King took a step back, rising to his full height as he cradled his chin between a bony thumb and forefinger. A cold sweat dampened Rangobard's shirt as he awaited the consequences of Dimmer's boldness. Albedo. Yes, Your Majesty? What are your thoughts on this? The idea that the Imperial Ministry of Foreign Affairs isn't actively working to establish a diplomatic mission in their suzerain's capital can only be considered an insult. Shall I have the entire department and their families eviscerated and put on display across the Empire? Rangobard felt the blood drain from his face. This was Albedo? The Prime Minister of the Sorcerer's Kingdom? The serene smile never left her face as she made her vicious offer. Ah, no, the Sorcerer King cleared his non-existent throat. Let's try this another way. To be clear, Miss Erix, I would normally frown upon such disregard for hierarchy. In this case, however, the Empire's deliberations seem meaningless. Albedo, initiate the relevant procedures through the proper channels. Prime Minister Albedo placed a hand over her ample cleavage and lowered herself into an elegant curtsy. It will be as you command, Your Majesty. A king that casually commands empires. Is this the true face of Ainzulgaon? Well, then, we should be on our way. I look forward to seeing you in the future, Ambassador Erix. Wahoo! 19th day, Upper Fire Month, 1 CE. You did what? In the crimson-hued court of Shiltir Bloodfallen, Ludmilla puzzled over a piece of paperwork at her desk. She had come for a bit of quiet in the hope that she could sneak some work in before the evening's events, but instead found Lian already inside. To be fair, it would have probably remained quiet had she not made the mistake of mentioning where Frian's party had gone after their visit to Warden's Vale. I sent them north so they could see the rest of the duchy. You know, Lian said, we were specifically trying to keep them away from all that. This is why we don't let you do any marketing. You suck at it. Because I'm honest? Because you arm people with excuses, Lian told her. You may think you're being fair, but all you're doing is showing them stuff that gives them reasons to turn down what we're offering. What do you think would happen to a bakery's sales if they went out of their way to tell people that their cakes would make them fat? Those who were concerned about it would try to refrain from eating too much cake. Lian stared at her. Ludmilla stared back. The younger woman simultaneously rolled her eyes and sighed, leaning back into her chaise. The Western Territories aren't that bad, Ludmilla said. They are doing much better than when we were still a part of Riastais. Considering that Frian and her party are Imperials, I'm sure they'll consider those fiefs to be doing far better than mine. Clara, Lian said, help me out here. You worry too much. Clara's voice rose from Ludmilla's lap. Clara was the second distraction. Ludmilla didn't know why she thought would be able to get any work done. This is nepotism, Lian grumbled. Corruption. Seeing how far behind the other territories are relative to us won't keep them from taking the path we've laid out, Clara said. Imperials are terribly optimistic when it comes to self-assessment. They'll think they can do better. Once they get back to their territories, they'll be focused on how they can make everything work to further their goals.
Speaking of which, Ludmilla said, how is the trade show coming along?
Nothing's fallen outside of our expectations so far.
Clara stretched and yawned.
All parties seem to be satisfied, and the next faction's delegation will be arriving just in time to hear Counter Borbad's people smugly hint about the advantages that they've gained.
What advantages have they gained? Ludmilla asked. Clara sat up and scooted up against Ludmilla, wrapping a hand around her waist and leaning against her shoulder. Temporary ones, Clara answered. Once we're done with every faction, the first set should have a lead of a few months, and most of the changes can't be fully implemented until the next sowing season.
And since they're trying to minimize the impact of the undead on their people, Leanne said, they are going to have a hell of a time trying to spy on one another. It'll be fun watching how they compete.
Fun.
Ludmilla frowned across the court at Leanne. Need I remind you that this is going to affect the lives of millions of people?
I know. Leanne waved her hand dismissively. It's the Empire, so there are bound to be plenty who slip through the cracks, but this sort of competition tends to improve things overall. Assuming they don't mismanage their gains.
That's the good thing about the Imperial administration, yeah? Once they catch a whiff of what's happening, and I assume that Freyan will inform the court council about it, they'll be constantly hounding everyone to optimize everything. The best part about all of this is that it's the Empire's problem, not ours. We just sell them what they want.
She still wasn't optimistic about how things would play out. The highly centralized systems of the Empire could give rise to monolithic actions for a country that was far from monolithic. It was, however, as Leanne said, the Empire's problem. Whether the Empire's actions were the Sorcerer's Kingdom's problem was not for Ludmilla and her friends to decide, and it appeared that the royal court was content to see where the Empire's path would lead.
When do you think they'll get here?
Leanne asked.
Who? Freyan and them. I told them that the delegation from the Draconic Kingdom would arrive this evening, Ludmilla said, so I imagine they will arrive with ample time to prepare.
I'm beginning to feel sorry for her, Clara said. They've foisted so much work on the poor woman. It's still to her advantage, Leanne said. She becomes more and more indispensable to the Empire, plus she can guilt people into working harder after everything she's done. How are we for time?
Breakfast should be officially wrapping up soon, but everyone's involved in negotiations with one house or another. We can expect things to drag on for the next little while, thank the gods. My face is cramped up from smiling all the time. To think that we're doing this for the next few months, I hope I don't end up with some weird condition. Her friends were so excited about the event going into it, and Leanne had been the most excited of them all. It was barely a week since it had begun in earnest, and now she made it sound as if she had been playing hostess for much longer.
Didn't you say it was going to be fun? Ludmilla asked.
It is, Leanne answered. If you've somehow already forgotten what it's like to be one of the living, people still get tired when they're having fun.
Would she forget? She was fairly certain that she remembered what it felt like to be exhausted, but it was merely a memory that would grow increasingly distant. Perhaps time would twist that memory, or it would become obscured by the mists of eternity. The sensations of the living weren't like events that could be recorded into history or recalled in folklore, after all. I should ask Lady Shiltier about it. Immortal minds had to work differently. She clearly didn't have a perfect recollection of her experiences as frost dragons did, but she also couldn't imagine that her memory would remain that of a human. Then again, how she might be able to recall an eternity of memories was also beyond her ability to comprehend.
What are you thinking about?
Clara asked. Memory, Ludmilla answered. Maybe I will eventually forget what it's like to be human.
Maybe I'll forget that we ever had this discussion. She jerked as Clara poked her in the ribs.
Humph, Clara said, you seem human enough. As for your memories, I admit that would be annoying, but only other immortals would be able to call you out on them. What matters is that we'll always be together, right? Barring some calamity, I suppose, Ludmilla replied. Speaking of immortals, how is Florine doing with her thing? Who knows, Leanne shrugged. It's barely been a month since she left for the Abelian Hills. She's probably forgotten all about it while boobing out there. You'd think someone would be more excited about, immortality. It's not necessarily a bad approach, Clara said.
Many would drop everything else to seize the opportunity she has been granted. Doing so would send a very clear message to the royal court that service has become a secondary priority, so sending Florine to the Abelian Hills with the time and power to do anything that she wanted was a test to see what she would do about the thingy? Maybe not specifically, Clara replied, but must it be? One's behavior in those circumstances would inform the royal court of many aspects of one's character. They'd understandably scrutinize candidates for traits and behaviors that would be problematic in an immortal official, I guess. Leanne put her elbows on her desk and propped her chin in her palms. Does that mean I should tone things down to get my thingy, too? Of course not, Ludmilla frowned. Florine has bitten Lady Albedo on more than one occasion, Lady Shiltia, too. She still received her item. Our superiors want people who know what they are doing and are confident enough about it to stand their ground even before the royal court. Pretending to be nice and well-behaved won't do you any favors. May. Don't May me, I know you wouldn't have it any other way. May. A displeased sound came from Clara as Ludmilla rose from her desk. Since she wouldn't be able to get any work done, it was probably a better idea to have her friends appear before their guests. Their maids joined them in the antechambers of the court and accompanied them to the castle's second floor where the visiting nobles were still mostly gathered in their respective balcony dining areas. Countess Corlin, several nobles at one of the tables rose at Clara's approach. Countess Wagner. Good morning. Count Reberbad, Clara smiled. I trust that I find you and your family well this morning? So this is Rangobart's father. Ludmilla could see some similarities to the mage captain, but Lord Reberbad was overall more squarish. To his left was probably Rangobart's eldest brother, who was a much closer match to their father. Indeed, Count Reberbad nodded. Thanks to your fine hospitality, every day feels more refreshing than the last. I'll be loath to leave when the time comes. Who is this gallant new addition to your entourage? The noblewoman to the Count's right asked. One of your knights, perhaps? Across the table from Count Reberbad, Count Vulkanheim went into a fit of coughing. The imperial aristocrats around the table didn't miss his reaction, but Clara only beamed in response. I have the pleasure of introducing you to Ludmilla of House Zaradnik, she said. Ludmilla of House Zaradnik. Count Reberbad furrowed his brow in thought, and then his eyes widened. You mean this is the Baroness Zaradnik from whom we received the invitations to this exposition? I am pleased to see that your agents returned to you unharmed, my lord, Ludmilla said. Your son, Rangobart, was also quite helpful during the Blister campaign. I pray you'll forgive us for our presumption, my lady. The Count inclined his head slightly. I'm also glad to hear that my son was of some use to you. As expected, the older noble's facade of composure was difficult to crack when he was in his element. He had managed to slip in an apology for sending Rangobart to seduce her while making it seem like he had shrewdly maneuvered his son for some other purpose in front of his peers. Viscount Brennenthal has made quite the ascent since I saw him last, Ludmilla said. House Reberbad must be very proud of his achievements. Oh, we are. The Count laughed gaily. He has succeeded far beyond our expectations. We always intended for Rangobard to form a cadet branch, but leaping straight to Viscount was quite something. Is this guy trying to fight you? Ludmilla glanced at Leanne, who had donned a pleasant mask just like everyone else around the table. That's probably my fault. I think I accidentally made him think I had a hand in his promotion by saying what I did, and now he's trying to get his son back under his influence. Didn't he send Rangobart into your clutches in the first place? He didn't end up in my clutches. Well, maybe just a bit. How go your negotiations with House Vulkanheim, Lord Reberbad? Clara asked. We are in accord on many points, Lord Reberbad answered, including the fact that we won't realize the full potential of any trade agreement until the new infrastructure and logistics that you have on display here are adopted. The problem now is that most of the houses in my delegation do not have fiefs bordering the Sorcerer's kingdom. I'm certain that any sensible imperial aristocrat will find what we have to offer compelling, Clara said. If not, I firmly believe that those who lack the foresight to follow your lead will only fall behind. It is their game to lose. Count Reberbad nodded with a grunt. One can only hope they know good sense when they see it, he said. The politics of the empire have grown increasingly stagnant and the emperor is content to see the entire establishment wither away. Our country is doomed to become a soulless machine that does nothing but the bidding of the Imperial administration if things remain as they are.
Oof, heavy.
For all of their infighting, the Imperial nobility seemed to understand what was happening to the Empire. She had noted this with the Dowager Duchess von Gushmund and several other nobles in the Empire.
Now,
that same awareness was being displayed by Count Roberbad. This presented a potential quirk in the job class system. If challenge led to growth, then the nobles who managed to thrive in the highly competitive and treacherous Empire would be relatively high level. With those levels came raw capability and uncanny insights into various fields related to one's vocation. Unfortunately, it seemed the past set precedents that probably made it next to impossible for a noble to change their stance once they achieved those levels. If this was the case, it went a long way into explaining why the royal court of Riestais remained in a perpetual deadlock and how the emperor could so easily keep his vassals suppressed. Now that she thought about it, the way that Queen Auriculus guided her court indicated that she knew about the phenomena and actively prevented it from ever happening in her kingdom.
This job class system is more a curse than a blessing. We're fortunate to have Lady Shiltir guiding us. It took an hour for Clara to visit with the nobles at each of the tables, at which point they shifted their focus to the evening's reception. The details of the delegation's arrival were somewhat vague, stating only that they needed an out-of-the-way spot prepared, as well as a stateroom roughly the size of the one that Ludmilla and her friends had been accommodated in during their time in the Draconic Kingdom.
What do you think they meant by an out-of-the-way spot?
Leanne asked.
They may be using a magical technique to get here, Clara offered. We offered to teleport them over, but they declined. I'm not sure how else they'd cover the distance so quickly. So a secluded place where not too many people might get in the way, Ludmilla said, recalling the teleportation gazebo in E-Rantel. How about the Western Garden?
I hope they won't mind, Clara said.
The groundskeepers are still working on it. Ludmilla, could you? Ludmilla raised her hand in front of herself. A set of steps steadily approached, belonging to a sandy-haired imperial noblewoman in a frilly blue dress. She reached the top of the stairs to the eastern atrium and lowered her head respectfully.
Countess Corlin.
Yes,
how may I help you,
Baroness Lisenthal? The ladies and I were wondering if there is a dress code for the reception this evening, Lady Lisenthal said as she raised her head. Or perhaps certain articles we shouldn't wear.
Ah, about that, Clara said.
I fully intended to have everyone representing their respective cultures. As for any improper articles. Have you seen the Draconic Kingdom's fashion? Leanne asked. Lady Lisenthal's eyes went from Clara to Leanne. Their fashion, my lady?
I'm afraid not.
The Empire has no direct dealings with the Draconic Kingdom, though there are rumors about roads being built to the south. Hold on a second. Leanne reached into the infinite haversack at her waist and rummaged around. The latter part shouldn't have been necessary. It felt like more than half of Leanne's actions were some form of showmanship. She hadn't yet figured out whether Leanne was aware of it or not. Several moments later, Leanne fished out a set of flimsy-looking garments. Rose came around to help hold the outfit in front of Leanne. Lady Lisenthal covered her face in her hands, going red to the tips of her ears.
Why you wore that?
She peeked at Leanne through her fingers. Yep.
Leanne grinned. We all did.
I didn't, Clara sniffed. The no fun faction doesn't count, Leanne said. It's regular fashion down in the Draconic Kingdom, anyway. Everyone from commoners to aristocrats wears some version of this. The heat and humidity down there will kill you if you wear a big, fancy dress like we do up here. Wanna try one on? Lady Lisenthal violently shook her head. After she retreated, Clara led them out a side entrance to the castle grounds. Ludmilla, she said, could you help arrange additional security? I have to go and make sure our guests don't land in a pile of dead leaves. All right. I should get over to the border, Leanne said. The next bunch of Imperials is due soon. Do you think I still need to hide the Solitas? It wouldn't hurt, Clara said. They are from the Angelfort region, but I doubt they're fine around the undead. They went their separate ways, and Ludmilla went to inspect the perimeter of the West Garden. Initially meant to be Clara's private garden, it had become a place where the groundskeepers tried all sorts of personal projects after Lord Mayor started working on the rooftop for Lady Shiltir's court. After making a full round, she went to find Clara, Taia, and Amelia, who were in a small clearing with a few benches where the castle staff would sometimes come out for breaks.
We are using this spot? Ludmilla asked.
Clara answered.
We'll take them straight into the castle, so I don't think we need anything too fancy. I just didn't want them to appear in front of a giant mess.
Ludmilla called for an elder lich to come join them and arranged for a dozen death knights to stand guard nearby. Clara returned to attend to her guests while Ludmilla stayed behind to review the new sentries. How come we don't have ceremonial garb for honor guards? Ludmilla asked as she picked off a leaf skewered on one of their armor spikes. The servitors already have arms and armor created by the Supreme One, the elder lich following her around answered. There is no greater honor than to wield that which they have already been bestowed. She looked up at the Death Knight, but it didn't offer any feedback. Even between Wardensvale and Calling County, there appeared to be a distinct difference in culture between the undead servitors. Things were much better than in other parts of the Sorceress Kingdom where they had next to no interaction with the citizens and few opportunities to form an identity for themselves, but she had hoped they would be further along. What criteria were used to choose these sentries? Their performance record in Calling Harbor was deemed satisfactory and they are familiar with the castle grounds. In other words, they earned the qualifications for the post. Wouldn't it make sense if they wear something that signifies that achievement? This one fails to recognize the merit in such measures. What each servitor is capable of is already known to those responsible for deployment. I bet Lord Cocytus would latch onto the idea more readily. She would have to put together a comprehensive proposal at some point. It felt strange how the Sorceress Kingdom took an interest in the development of its citizens, but not the undead servitors that existed alongside them. If a Death Knight served for 1,000 years, it should have some visible record of that service for everyone to recognize. Once she was satisfied with the security arrangements, she returned indoors to join Clara in the main exhibition hall. Fortunately, they were content to leave her alone and focus all of their energy on Clara and the rest of the Sorceress Kingdom's nobility. By and large, they remained unchanged from the various examples of civilian nobility that she had brushed up against during her visit to the Empire. The main difference now was that they were solidly committed to forging new paths to power using what the Sorceress Kingdom had to offer, and their myriad avenues of discourse reflected that. Countess Corlin, Count Roberbad said as he stood at the center of a group of his allies, in light of the Empire's new expansionary drive, what do you think we can do to maintain our relevance? They've gotten quite cozy with her. It sounded like they were already treating Clara as one of them, or at least a fellow civilian aristocrat. Beyond that, they were seeking her out for her opinions despite her gender and young age. At the same time, they occasionally glanced at Ludmilla as if she was an imperial knight. You're referring to the impending growth of the martial aristocracy? Indeed, my lady, Lord Roberbad nodded. Expansion is spearheaded by the Imperial Knights, and so the Imperial Knights are awarded with the new lands conquered by the Empire. We understand that this will ultimately bring wealth and prosperity to the Empire, but, sooner or later, the agendas of the Imperial Army will dominate our politics. I won't claim to be an expert on Imperial affairs, my lord, Clara replied, but aren't you restricting your thinking to past experience? The Empire is a competitive place, partially because of the conditions imposed upon you by the Emperor, and partially because its expansion has slowed considerably over the generations, leaving limited resources to compete over. Similarly, you have become accustomed to the idea that the Imperial Knights tend to be the only ones awarded new lands, usually cut out of the former territories of the attainted. In the future, however, do you truly believe that this will be the case? The Imperial aristocrats exchanged looks in the wake of Clara's question. Count Roberbad allowed the silence to stretch on for a few seconds before speaking again. What are you proposing? He asked. Rather than a proposal, Clara answered, it is merely an observation. The Emperor favors the Imperial Army as a matter of necessity, but new realities will force the Empire to reassess what is truly necessary. The Imperial Knights may conquer new frontiers, but who is it that develops them? Who manages the bulk of the Empire's industry, wealth, and trade? Every house in your party has sons and daughters who serve in the Imperial administration. Is that service less worthy than that of an Imperial Knight? Without the participation of your houses, Imperial expansion will be a pale shadow of what it could be. She's right. A nobleman standing next to Count Roberbad said, as much as the Emperor suppresses us, we are still essential for the Empire. The frontier will remain a frontier without our houses providing the Empire with seneschals and bureaucrats for the administration. Our children should be afforded the same considerations as the children of the martial aristocracy. Heads nodded in agreement throughout the crowd. If Ludmilla recalled correctly, their children in the imperial administration did receive the same considerations as the martial scions who joined the imperial knights, at least as far as financial compensation went. The main difference was that an imperial knight had more opportunities to do something flashy that landed them a title. To a noble, the difference was everything. I believe you already have all of the tools necessary to achieve what you desire for the future of your houses, Clara said. The proper application of everything you have at your disposal will make it clear that you are indispensable to the Empire. Of course, leveraging what the Sorceress Kingdom had to offer would make it even more the case, but everyone seemed to understand that implicitly. The excited discussion continued even as Leanne appeared with the next set of Imperial guests. Ludmilla shook her head as they, too, were infected by the newfound fervor of Count Borbad's party. Clara had to have timed things on purpose. Leanne came to stand alongside Clara and Ludmilla, her eyes going from guest to guest. What did you do? I gave Count Borbad's group one last little push. Little push? It looks like you've swept up the new people, too. They didn't even get our presentation yet. Clara only smiled in response, allowing the activity and the hall to continue uninterrupted. An interruption did finally come, however, in the form of Freyan Gushment. As one, the nobles hushed at the appearance of the imperial princess. Freyan sent Clara a small look of confusion, coming over to speak in low tones. Are they plotting something? That's a silly question, Clara answered. How was your tour of the Western Duchy? We actually spent most of our time in E-Rantel, Freyan replied. We even saw the Sorcerer King. Dimir gushed, he's super nice. I'm glad you feel that way, Ludmilla smiled. I only wish that everyone would realize that. Wow, I've never seen her smile like that before. Ludmilla wiped the smile off of her face. A silly madness always took root in her whenever she thought about the Sorcerer King. Did we miss the Draconic Kingdom delegation's arrival? Freyan asked. I still don't know what all that excitement was about. They should be here soon, Clara answered. Since you're the only member of the Imperial dynasty present, I suppose you should be there with us when they arrive. Did you bring your liquor? Leanne asked. I did. Dimir said, hopefully it will be enough to get the queen. Rangobart, help me carry it. What? Viscount Brennenthal obligingly walked off after Dimir. When the time came for the Draconic Kingdom's delegation to arrive, they gathered in the West Garden. In the space between the wooden benches at the center of the garden, Leanne and Dimir arranged their wine bottles in a pair of concentric circles. Prez, Dimir said, what do you think of this formation? I can't believe you're doing this, Freyan said. Never mind doing it with liquor, the queen of a country isn't a summon. I gotta maximize my chances. I'm on a roll and I'm not about to let it end. Dimir seems much more energetic than before, Ludmilla noted. Did something happen? It's complicated, Freyan said. Or maybe not. Either way, the Imperial Ministry of Foreign Affairs is going to be thrown into chaos when we get back. After fussing around with the formation of wine bottles for a bit, Dimir and Leanne returned to the group. Then, at the appointed time, Draudilin Auriculus, the black-scale dragon lord and queen of the Draconic Kingdom, appeared right in the center of the formation. It worked? Leanne said. Dimir's mouth fell open. Queen Auriculus looked at her feet. What's this? Beside the queen, Marshal Saul Kanian knelt to retrieve one of the bottles and presented it for the queen's inspection. Oh, Queen Auriculus' expression brightened. Someone has exceptional taste. Dimir Eric's here prepared it for your arrival, your majesty. Leanne gestured at the ecstatic imperial scion. Is that so? The queen peered at Dimir. Gem, what a curious soul. Sorul, give her a bottle. Yes, your majesty. Salacia Sorul came forward with a large black bottle cradled in her arms. Dimir's eyes widened. Is that? Umu, Queen Auriculus nodded. Black scale. We brought quite a bit to help spice up Countess Corlin's event here, but that one is yours. Dimir sucked in a gasp, her eyes welling with tears. I'll serve you forever, your majesty, she cried. Oh oi, don't go betraying your country so easily. We don't want that blonde brat hating us more than he already does. The small group that had appeared with Queen Auriculus left the circle of bottles. They were all familiar faces, members of the Queen's palace staff that went on to assume positions in her court. "Will you be attending the reception, Your Majesty?" Clara asked. "It's a function for nobles, no?" Queen Auriculus answered. "Royalty showing up would put everyone on edge. Besides, it appears that I have many new friends to make an acquaintance with." Ludmilla knew that Queen Auricula's had an appreciation for liquor, but it was the first time she had ever heard anyone refer to wine bottles as friends. "In that case," Clara said, "I should at least make one introduction before you leave. This is Frianne von Gushmund, the new Imperial head court mage." Frianne lowered her head in a deep curtsy. "It is a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Your Majesty," she said. "I wasn't aware that you were such a powerful magic caster. Teleportation is magic of the 5th tier." "By the measures of your magic, yes," Queen Auriculus said. "But primal sorcery, what you may know as wild magic, does not have tiers. There is only the desired effect and the cost. Something like this is trivial to figure out once one puts their mind to it. The cost, I've heard that wild magic consumes souls. Is that true?" It doesn't. Overall, it's a simplistic way to put it, but I suppose the true terminology or concept does not exist in your language or perception. If I were to frame it in similar terms, my passengers here all contributed to the cost of the effect. "You took their souls?" "Just a bit," the Queen shrugged. "It's not as if I was casting a spell meant to wipe out a country. The missing stuff will probably be back by the time they finish dinner." Frianne fell into a deep silence after that. The members of the Draconic Kingdom's delegation looked perfectly fine, so they could only take Queen Auriculus at her word. Clara bid her footman to deliver their guests' luggage to their suite before turning back to converse with Queen Auriculus. "This may sound a bit strange, Your Majesty," she said, "but you have grown an unbelievable amount since we last saw one another." Ludmilla eyed the Queen. She was preoccupied with their surroundings, so hadn't taken note of it yet, but her appearance was a bit too different from the one she remembered. She was no longer the pubescent girl that they had met in the Draconic Kingdom, but a young woman 3 or 4 years older. Ludmilla's first thought was that it might be an illusion cast by the Queen, but her true sight didn't reveal any alternate forms superimposed over her present appearance. "Pretty good, no?" Queen Auriculus smiled and placed her hands on her hips. "Our subjects no longer need to be lolicons, so we are working to adjust things a bit." "I see." Clara said, "How have your people been faring?" "The food situation is tight even with the Sorceress Kingdom's generous assistance," the Queen replied, "but we will recover as we always have. Above all else, the people are glad that they won't be subjected to beastman raids anymore." "Have the security patrols encountered any beastmen since we left?" Ludmilla asked. For the first time since her appearance in the garden, Queen Auriculus' warm and light-hearted atmosphere melted away. "They have not caused us any trouble since they were driven out," she said, "and I fear that their troubles have only begun."